Speaking Human.
Today on Speaking Human, we stay thirsty with the most interesting man in the world as we revisit one of the past decade's most successful marketing campaigns. We don't always record podcasts, but when we do, it's Speaking Human.
Speaking Human.
Welcome to Speaking Human, the official podcast of Monsters Unlimited, a creative agency with a business brain. I'm Shad Conley, Communications Director at Monsters Unlimited, and my blood smells like cologne.
And I'm Patrick Jebber, and I don't always create awesome things, but when I do it at Monsters Unlimited.
Yeah. If this is your first time checking out the podcast, our goal on Speaking Human is to simplify complex marketing topics. We toss aside all the buzzwords and mumbo jumbo to focus on how marketing can bring brands and people together. On today's episode, we share one last drink with the advertising icon whose beard alone has experienced more than a lesser man's entire body. His friends call him by his name. His enemies don't call him anything because they're all dead. So let's get into it.
Get a last look at this brave pioneer who will not be returning.
His only regret is not knowing what regret feels like. He is the most interesting man in the world.
His trip to Mars is only one way.
Adios, amigo.
Stay thirsty, my friend.
What you just heard was an audio clip from a Dos Equis commercial where the beer brand's most interesting man in the world character bids adios amigos as he heads out on a one-way mission to Mars. That spot is part of a farewell tour for this version of the iconic marketing campaign, with Dos Equis set to reboot it with a different actor later this year. We're going to revisit this campaign and talk about what made it so successful. But first, Patrick, can you give our listeners a little background on this marketing and advertising phenomenon?
At almost 9 years old, Shad, the Dos Equis brand, owned by Amsterdam-based brewer Heineken, nearly tripled its business since the campaign was introduced. That's huge. In the past year alone, the sales of Dos Equis Lager Especial grew 10.2% to 325 million, roughly. The number of cases Dos Equis shipped between 2007 and 2015 grew by 34.8%, almost 35%. But on top of all that, Heineken estimates that about 25% of its future growth will come from the Dos Equis brand. It's a pretty big portion of their business, obviously.
Yeah, and it just goes to show the impact that marketing can have as a whole, but definitely the specific impact it's had in this case. I mean, there was a time I remember Dos Equis was just kind of like this obscure import, and now it's like a Corona level beer that everybody at least knows the brand name.
Yeah, it's built a lot of positive brand equity over the last 9 years for sure.
So, jumping right into our discussion here, looking back on this campaign, which, like you said, has been going 9 years, which is pretty impressive. You don't see a lot of marketing campaigns with that kind of longevity in general. Do you remember when you first saw one of these commercials or first heard about this campaign? And what was your reaction to it?
I remember the early days of the campaign. I don't really remember the first one, but I do remember people originally talking about it. Even more so, I remember people creating their own versions, like, I don't like to drive erratically, but when I do, I crash into buildings and take out fire hydrants. Just like weird stuff like that, which is what made the ad campaign so good, is that people just kind of took it and ran with it on their own.
Yeah, when you can insert yourself into it a little bit. My experience is kind of similar. I can remember seeing the commercial, like on my own, seeing it on TV and it catching my attention, but not in like a mind-blowing sort of way where I was like, whoa,
yeah,
this changes everything. But what I do remember, what I can vividly remember is being at, around the time this came out, being at a Memorial Day or Labor Day picnic and somebody referencing it. And, that being the sort of click moment where I was like, okay, this is the thing now. This is the thing people are going to do or they're going to talk about or create their own now. And that has just obviously snowballed over time it became, like I said, more of a thing, like a cultural reference point, as opposed to just a marketing campaign.
I sort of compare it to the Captain Morgans. You got a little captain in you. You know, when people started doing...
They do the pose, the captain's pose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting looking back, you know, it just kind of started out as like anything else. And then where it's gone from there and how it's opened up, and looking back on it a decade later, now it's something legendary.
Just like the man himself.
That's right. So why do you think this campaign struck such a chord? You know, you touched on that a little bit, but what do you think it does so well, or how it, you know, connected with people in this way?
Well, what I particularly like about the campaign is that they took chances. Take, for instance, a small but very chancy thing. The line in the ad, "I don't always drink beer," which was very controversial internally for the brand. And even though it's only half of the statement, it implies that the man selling the beer, the most interesting man, doesn't always drink beer. And that's not what most advertisers would deem acceptable in a campaign. You know, you never want to imply that your person selling your product or service doesn't use it all the time, you know?
Yeah.
But it worked here because the whole thing works together, you know what I mean? But going back to those instances of people making up their most interesting man quotes, and that's the key to the success of this campaign is, you know, the originals were so bizarre and crazy ridiculous that it opened the door for everyone to kind of recite those, and they didn't have to be accurate. And then the spin-offs came. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so successful. What it did well, it had legs because of that. Yeah,
I agree with that. It all kind of started with this. They had a pretty good core to it and something that was interesting. You know, there's a different tone to it. And it's funny and it's amusing, but like a lot of other campaigns and commercials especially, it never seemed like it was trying super hard to be funny. You know, it just had this laid back, I guess you would call it cool to it, because it just didn't seem to be trying too hard to impress you. And as a result, you know, when you're not trying to impress people, generally that's when you impress. You know, they had an Ad Age article talking about with the creators of the campaign and how they came up with it. And, you know, one of the quotes from one of the guys behind it was like, the original notion of that whole thing, before it went kind of all Chuck Norris on everyone, was that this guy was sort of only minimally more interesting than the rest of us young, neutered millennial guys out there. So I think there's something to that, you know, that we're all just like one beer away from being this guy who, you know, is described as being super interesting, but they never really showed him doing, you know, it got wilder as it went on, but originally, you know, he'd be like playing handball or like just drinking on a boat, you know, like these kind of things where you're like, okay, he's interesting, but not super interesting. And I think that was the joke behind it.
And it definitely got more interesting as time went on. The things that he's done and what made him interesting.
Yeah, it got more epic.
Yeah.
We just played the clip, and the ending is he's going on a one-way mission to Mars.
Yeah.
That's like taking it to its extreme.
But what everyone can achieve when they're drinking, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Drink enough Dos Equis, eventually you'll go to Mars. 3 other things I want to hit on why I think this works in sort of a unique way. One is the signature style of the commercials. You don't see commercials, especially commercials in a series, having their own style, like a cinematic sort of style. You know how you can watch a certain movie and be like, oh, that's this director, or they're doing something different here. These definitely had that. You know, they used the vintage grainy footage and that Spanish guitar music all the time to make it instantly recognizable. You know, oh, okay, this is another Dos Equis commercial. This is in that series. So I thought that was interesting because not many ad campaigns have that.
Just like all great brands who are sort of build a brand identity, you know, they were basically saying, this is a premium import, you know what I mean? So to do that, they had to make everything about it interesting.
Yeah. And that kind of goes into the second thing I have here, which you kind of already touched on, is this sort of sneaky positioning of this whole campaign, right? Behind the whole campaign is a clear positioning of what this product is and who it's for. This is the beer for the occasional beer drinker. You know, that goes into that tagline. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, that's Dos Equis. You know, this is kind of what seems to me to be an overlooked audience, especially at the time when this came out, you know, focusing on that. I believe what they called it in the Ad Age article was kind of these young people who aren't just beer drinkers. You know, they go out and they like heavy drink, and beer is just kind of one aspect of everything they're drinking. And in a night, and that was who they were targeting with this. So that's some smart and effective positioning they had there.
Yeah. I mean, focusing on that audience who is highly overlooked for sure.
Yeah. And then the final thing, I pointed out was the brand reinforcement. These commercials always end with that tagline. I don't always drink beer, but when I do, it's Dos Equis, Dos Equis, Dos Equis. It always ended on that bang the drum for the brand,
Which every ad should do.
Every ad should do, but a surprising number of them don't do. I mean, how many ads can you think of where you can kind of remember what happened in the ad, but you can't remember what the actual product was?
Something that we're always talking about. They tied the ad campaign to the brand. So everywhere within the ads, it reinforced the brand throughout the entire thing, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's as much of a branding campaign as it really is a marketing campaign. It's really like, let's push out this brand. Let's get people to know this brand more so than let's actually push the product. It seems to me anyway. And I think it shows with the results of that brand recognition over time.
Absolutely.
I don't know how many commercials they've had now or different ads or print things or, online marketing things they've done with this. What are kind of some of your favorites? Are there any that stick out to you or any lines or sayings? Because obviously there's a lot of clever Chuck Norris style lines or sayings they've created over time. Do you have any favorites?
I think the ads are usually entertaining. All of them are, pretty entertaining. Some of my favorite lines, I would say that's an easier question to answer. He's won the Lifetime Achievement Award twice. That's a fun one. Mosquitoes refuse to bite him purely out of respect. I don't know why I love that. And he lives vicariously through himself. That's probably my favorite.
Or what would be even crazier? How about this?
He can speak French and Russian.
Which was on my list of some of my favorites. It's funny, though, the way you talk about it, the commercials and the sayings. What strikes me is when I was trying to think of the answer to this, there's such a strong sense of sameness between the commercials that none of them really actually pop out to you. You're not even sure, I don't know, that I could differentiate them in any sort of way, which is kind of crazy for something that's gone on this long. But it's actually, I think, kind of impressive because they've kept this same format and just focused on bringing a little bit of new wit and visuals and writing to it to make it stay alive, to make it seem new when it's really just kind of the same thing. They're just doing it in different ways over and over again for 9 years.
Yeah, that's why the lines tend to stick out a little bit more because they're the thing that sticks with you without, you even remembering what the ad was itself.
Yeah, and they're the thing that's gotten passed around and, social posted and reposted 1,000 times. I'll throw out a few of my favorite lines. You already mentioned he can speak Russian in French, which is pretty good. A few of my other favorites, he gave his father the talk. Once a rattlesnake bit him. After 5 days of excruciating pain, the snake finally died. If he were to punch you in the face, you would have to fight off a strong urge to thank him.
I like that one too.
Yeah, so there are all those things that make, they just give you that little chuckle. They fueled a whole culture of creating your own, which was, as mentioned by Chuck Norris, I don't know if that came before or after when people were doing that same thing with Chuck Norris.
I think Chuck Norris came before it, but,
I think so.
Maybe that was inspiration. I don't know.
Well, isn't Chuck Norris inspiration for us all, Patrick?
Yeah.
His tears can cure cancer if only he would cry.
See, some Chuck Norris ones too, so they probably were inspiration for them.
Yeah. And, it was they saw how much people passed those around and loved to share those. I feel like in the early aughts that was happening before the internet went share crazy too.
Yeah.
From my recollection of it, I remember somebody emailing me a list of them. So that's interesting tie-in. So looking back on this, they're kind of ending this campaign or this version of this campaign with this actor. I don't know. I guess they say maybe it'll go on. They're just looking for a younger person to put in a variation of this role, though they say the most interesting man. This character will not be remade. It'll be something probably different, but the same. So what do you think? Looking back on this campaign, is this Hall of Fame good? Does this go down as one of the best marketing/advertising campaigns ever?
Here's the thing, Shad. When you create a campaign that inspires what I'd like to call public parodies, I've coined that term, by the way.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. When you create a campaign that people not only recite verbatim, but start creating their own quotes, then in my opinion, you've created a successful marketing campaign, which I think we've come to the conclusion of in this podcast. So should it be in the Hall of Fame? I'd say yes, because it has historical value as a successful ad campaign. And isn't that what all Hall of Famers should do, should do?
Yeah, it's a cultural touchstone. You know, it goes in that kind of pop culture pantheon where people will probably be referencing this a decade from now. Though I don't know how current you'll be if it's, 2025 and you're like, I don't always fill in the blank. But it could be. But I mean, and just the success you've mentioned, in the intro where you talked about how much the sales and the brand has been boosted by this campaign. I mean, that's huge. So you pair that, what it's become culturally with what it's done for the brand. And I think you have a clear Hall of Famer there. The funny thing is, though, when I think about it, when I just look at kind of the campaign itself, you're not blown away by its brilliance. It wasn't anything that was like, whoa, they did something totally different, or this is structurally like nothing I've ever seen before. It just kind of works. Maybe that's why it's so brilliant. It's like when anybody's really good at what they do and they do it with that laid back ease where it makes it look easy. It doesn't look like it's hard. They're not doing a hard marketing push. Maybe it's just done so well, it doesn't look like they're trying.
In this campaign, it's the essence of that character too, right? Because he doesn't have to try. It's almost synonymous with that character,
Yeah, the campaign, like the man, makes marketing look easy, which it's not, which we all know, if anybody's ever done it knows it's not.
Yeah.
Leading
Awesome.
right into, what's your top takeaway? What can companies learn from Dos Equis' most interesting man in the world campaign?
Get ready for this doozy, Shad.
I'm ready.
You can quote me on this. Be willing to take chances. That's right. Step out on a limb. To me, this was a little out of the ordinary. You didn't see a lot of alcoholic beverages doing stuff like this at the time. They tried something new. And I think as humans, we're creatures of habit and we tend to fall into routines and our marketing and advertising campaigns become stale. What if we tried this? Or I was thinking about something like this, don't always discount those ideas because like the creators of this ad campaign, just because you've done things a certain way for so long doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Jump from your safety net. I would almost go as far as saying, be unsafe, my friends. But that might be taken the wrong way.
I love it. That's true. That's true. That could encourage people to do a lot of not great things. But, that was great. I love everything you said. And you actually gave me an inspirational idea that I'm going to pass along to Dos Equis right now as you were saying that. What about this for a follow-up, right? The most interesting woman in the world.
Oh, gosh.
That's good, right? I just came up with that. And I don't know what it was when you were talking that triggered that, just taking risks. I'm like, well, what about reaching out to, they're so focused on this young male audience. Why not focus on this young female audience? You already have established this branding. Take it and try to expand your audience from there.
That's brilliant.
It's good, right?
Yeah. What I like about that is it's a natural extension and it's pulling in your opposite sex, Why can't a woman be the most interesting woman in the world? I think that would actually be awesome to see. Like, what would be the things that a woman would do that would be the most interesting things?
Yeah, it's a natural extension from what they've already done. It's like a ladder upwards, whereas I think what they're probably going to do is more of a ladder across, where they're going to take some aspects of this and make it a younger man somehow, right? That seems like that would be the typical idea they would take and run with it. Whereas that, going with the most interesting woman in the world, Dos Equis, there's infinite possibility there.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they're going to listen to this podcast and it's going to happen. We don't necessarily want credit for it.
We wouldn't mind credit.
We wouldn't mind credit. We don't always like credit, but when we do, we want it from Dos Equis.
Yeah. But, so look at that. Your takeaway has sparked a brilliant idea that I'm giving to you, Dos Equis, on a silver platter. Now that we've done that, I'll move into my actual takeaway to that little sidetrack, that valuable little sidetrack.
Yeah, it's very valuable.
So my final takeaway was, in marketing, sometimes in addition to a good idea, it takes a little luck and a little magic. This is something forgotten. Marketing campaigns have so many moving parts. It's often hard to get them all lined up to achieve any level of success, let alone the massive success this campaign's experienced. But you think about this campaign, would it work as well with a different actor? Or maybe if they would have chosen a different visual style for the commercials? Or what if they would have used a different tagline? Probably not. Like a great pop song, all these little things come together and it hits all the right notes and it just sounds perfect to you. Now that's incredibly rare. And that's something companies shouldn't forget. They should understand that that's rare. And success to this degree of this campaign, it can't totally be constructed, right? There's these outside forces that have to lift it up and take it there. So that's just something to keep in mind. And the key is when you're creating your campaign, not being like, how do we create that campaign? How do we make it do that? The key is just creating a campaign you believe in. And when you do that, when you have a unique concept and message and approach, something you're like, all right, I like this. I think it's doing exactly what it needs to do. When you have all those things in line, then you have a shot at finding that luck and stumbling on that magic that makes a legendary campaign.
That takeaway by itself is epic, Shad.
More epic than my, new campaign for Dos Equis?
They go hand in hand. I feel like we need to write a book on your takeaway. Your takeaway was poetry.
I don't always have takeaways, but when I do, they're epic. Just kidding. I always have takeaways every episode. So strong finish for this episode of Speaking Human. A lot of amazing things just happened.
Yeah, we like to finish strong. We don't always finish strong, but when we do it on Speaking Human.
Yeah, we're trying. We're trying to use that tagline a lot. Maybe shoehorning it in a little too much, some would say. I don't know.
What does that sound? That's me shoehorning another quote in.
I don't always shoehorn quotes, but when I do, they're from Dos Equis.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. We got a lot of good stuff in there, a lot of interesting things. Maybe not as interesting as the most interesting man in the world, but I think they're pretty good. So that's it for today's episode, everyone. You can find current and past episodes of the podcast at none other than speakinghuman.com. You can also subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Human podcast in the iTunes store. In addition, you can now find us on SoundCloud. Just go to our website and you'll find a link to it. Check us out, rate us, review us, all those good things.
Yeah, newest addition to SoundCloud. Check that out. And email us with your thoughts on Dos Equis' Most Interesting Man campaign or my idea for the Most Interesting Woman in the World campaign. Let me know what you think of that or any questions or comments. Feedback at thinkmonsters.com. That's feedback at thinkmonsters.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Speaking Human. Catch you then, humans.
Speaking Human.
The police often question him just because they find him interesting. His beard alone has experienced more than a lesser man's entire body. His blood smells like cologne. He is the most interesting man in the world.
I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis. Stay thirsty, my friends.